It's our What If series on Orange and Blue today, presented by Champ Honda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason, with a What If 1996. 96 was a great year, Mace. I'm stuck in the 90s. It wasn't a great year for Broncos country because you had a young Terrell Davis and a John Elway-led team that lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Well, 1996 was actually a great year. It was when the calendar flipped to 1997.
Right.
Because they had that loss in the first weekend of 97. 96 the Broncos
was awesome.
Broncos go 13-3. They have the number 1 seed clinched well before the end of the regular season.
Right.
So they, for example, they go to Green Bay, Lambeau Field. They don't want to show the Packers any of their hand, thinking, hey, we might see those guys in Super Bowl 31.
Which was smart.
And Bill Musgrave starts the game and they get throttled. And from that point on, the Broncos never really get back their mojo.
And this was an era of football, and it's actually after this Broncos team, but this was an era where, like I said, Peyton Manning, Indianapolis Colts team would wrap it up, and then they'd start resting everybody, and then you'd be cold in the postseason. So the Broncos were rolling their absolute machine. And I'll say my controversial opinion right now, Mace, just to kick it off.
You were teasing me this morning.
They three-peat. If
Oh.
they beat Jacksonville, that means Brett Favre doesn't have a Super Bowl. Take that, Brett Favre. Like,
maybe he'd be less visible now if he didn't.
They'd have 31, 32, and 33. They'd have a three-peat. The only team, and I owe Pat Riley 75 cents now for saying that, they'd be the only team in NFL history that had a three-peat. They would have done it, Mace. I believe it. I may be wrong, but I believe him, yo. I don't know why, but I do.
Okay. I think they win it all that year. They beat the Packers.
Okay.
I think the Packers get their title a year later and the Broncos don't even make the Super Bowl.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the Broncos then, coming off of being beaten in the 97 postseason, bounce back and still win Super Bowl 33. They still get 2 titles out of that run. They are just 2 different titles. Because I
was hoping you'd say they'd meet the Packers twice in 31 and 32, and one get the other.
I'm actually going to go for an alternate universe take here that they lose at Kansas City in the divisional round, January of 98.
Is Rich Gannon playing that game? Because he should have been. Instead of Elvis.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to say the Chiefs eke out a tough win. Broncos fall short in the cold at Arrowhead. But I'm not saying the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. I think then the Steelers turn around and beat them the following week. And then the Packers beat the Steelers in Super Bowl 32. And that's when the Packers get their championship with Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre. And then the following year, the Broncos, and with John Elway, because I think John Elway comes back for 97 after winning it all in 96. And then after 97, like, okay, we're going to keep the band together. You know, I'm going to come back for one more run. And I think 1998 actually looks pretty much the way it actually did in this alternate universe.
Okay.
It's interesting to think about, though, what might have the Broncos done in free agency if they won the Super Bowl? Would they have felt the urgency, for example, to bring in a Neil Smith?
They might not have.
Yeah, if they've got the ring. I mean, one of the things about Neil Smith was like, man, we need somebody to get us over the top. You had Neil Smith, you had Darian Gordon, who was incredibly impactful on punt returns, especially.
Yes.
Do they make those same kind of moves if they win it all?
Well,
I think maybe you take. I think maybe one of those moves, probably Neil Smith, doesn't happen.
Well, and where's the urgency? You and I have talked to enough of those guys, whether it's Stink or Big Al or whoever. Like 96 pissed them off.
Yeah,
90s losing to the Jaguars, that just sharpened that sword. So that when they came out regular season 97, they were crushing fools because they knew what they'd missed out on and they knew who they were. That was a damn good team in that 96 regular season.
Right. And I think with this team, they would have found that edge in 98 after losing in 97 because they win it all in 96. And I think they have a very good year, but maybe that edge is absent because they haven't been knocked down in a high leverage game. That era of the Broncos had not. And so I think in this universe, I mean, you hate to say, oh, they're going to lose a game at Arrowhead, but I think that would have absolutely sharpened them for what was the best team of that run. With all respect to 96 and 97, 98 was the best of those 3 years. Everything was humming and clicking.
They were a machine.
Yes. They were such a well-oiled machine that they didn't even need John Elway to succeed. You plugged Bubby Brister in, and it just kept right on snapping. There was no drop-off with Bubby that year.
Right. Well, let me go back to the Kansas City game because it was Marty. Is my memory correct there? Because he played Elvis instead of Rich Gannon.
Yeah.
And Gannon was on the come up. He was one of those guys that was like hung around forever in Minnesota, whatever. It's like if he would have played, that story would have been different anyway. But they needed an edge, especially to win 3.
Mm-hmm. And I'm saying the edge. I'm saying that the edge was needed to get this to get the second title.
Win.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been back to back. It just would have been 2 and 3 years.
Would you, or do you say, this is a little bit off topic, so forgive me. Do you miss the Super Bowl rematches? Like you and I grew up in an era where we saw some Super Bowl rematches, where it was like, okay, can we get that, Steelers Dallas game again? And even though they played in Super Bowl 30, in the 70s, you had those rivalries, those matchups.
Twice in 3 years.
Right.
You had that.
Do we miss that now because the NFL it's built on parity? So and it's cool.
Yeah.
We get these different Super Bowl matchups, but we never, would you have liked to have seen, I know Orlando would have liked to have seen a 49ers rematch, in a Super Bowl with Kansas City. Like we don't get that anymore.
Yeah.
Because I love the idea of beating Brett Favre twice.
As a neutral observer, if I step away from how people in Broncos country hate the Chiefs, if I step away from that, I would love to see a Chiefs-Eagles rematch, preferably one that was officiated better.
Please and thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, I wouldn't mind seeing that. It won't happen because the Rams are in free fall. I would have been perfectly on board for a Bengals-Rams rematch. But I think, you kind of mentioned with parity, and it's like, I think I want to see a different permutation above all, give me like a Bengals-Eagles this year. The other thing that happens now, and this is where I think the NFL fumbled an opportunity with the 17th game. They base it on a rotation that says, okay, you're going to face, the team that's in your position from a specific division that rotates every year. I would have said, no, we're not doing that. I would have gone through all the teams in each conference, 1 to 16. Your 2 conference champions are team 1, team 1. Teams that lose the conference championship game are 2 and 2. And if this means you play a team twice in a year because that's the way the rotation happens, like you're like this year the Broncos are playing the entire NFC North, and let's say that the schedule draws them with Detroit. Oh, so what? You're going to play a home and home with Detroit this year. Who cares, right? But I would have 1 versus 1 in the conference, which would guarantee you a Super Bowl rematch every year, and I would have that always be the Thursday night opener. So in other words, this year we would open the schedule with Philadelphia at Kansas City.
That'd be awesome.
I think the NFL fumbled an opportunity here. Like, so if I were doing the schedule, if they had an 18th game, the 17th game we based on that, and maybe you give some flexibility if you want to avoid having a repeat matchup. You can kind of mess around with the teams that are like team 8, team 9, whatever. And then if they do an 18th game, that would be a permanent interconference rivalry. In other words, you guarantee every year New York plays New York. You guarantee every year the 2 LA teams play. You guarantee every year Washington and Baltimore play. Every year. Denver, I think its rival would probably be Seattle. to guarantee a Broncos Seahawks game every year, which is great. They're old rivals from the AFC West.
They are.
I think as far as like non-division teams, I think the Seahawks are probably still a team that invokes some scorn and hatred
People
here.
might forget
I
the
know in
Steve
Seattle
Largent
that
days.
Seattle, they don't like Denver. And I don't think people here like the Seahawks. So that's what I would
And they're
do.
almost opposites climate-wise because we have 300 days of sun and they got rain all the time.
Hey,
So it has been very Seattle-like here this year.
You know what, though? Having lived in Seattle, I can tell you the sun comes out more than people assume.
People want to say.
Yes.
96, beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. What if, Mace?
What if? You know, the funny thing is, in the end, I don't think it's all that dissimilar because I think the Broncos still get two. You say they get 3. I say they get 2. And then beyond that, I don't think history changes all that much. This is one where it's just how many rings you've got on the finger. I think the Broncos take a different path to the same endpoint, which is having 2 championships with John Elway, and then he still rides it off in the sunset. And but maybe I don't know. Maybe in this alternate universe, Mike Shanahan makes a different decision on quarterback in 1999 and chooses to start Buddy Brister instead of Brian Griese.
And then John comes out of retirement in November. There was always that rumor. I was listening to sports radio at the time.
Yeah.
And those, 99, 2000s, like, oh, John could come back. And then Brian Griese messed that up.
Well, I'll tell you, there was something interesting I was reading because I'm reading Mike Westhoff's book, of course, the Broncos assistant head coach. And he did an interview for the Dolphins head coaching job after Jimmy Johnson left following the 99 season. And you bring this up with Elway because, of course, Dan Marino, his final season turned out to be 1999. What Mike Westhoff wrote was that in his interview, his plan was to hire the Indianapolis Colts running back coach as offensive coordinator. And they were going to ride one more season with Dan Marino, but they were going to basically run a version of the Colts Manning offense. And said and as Westhoff wrote, all Dan Marino was going to do would he either hand the ball off or take one step back and throw, and every snap would be in the shotgun. And Westhoff said, I think Dan would have thrown for 5,000 yards. And it would have been a much better send-off for a fellow class of 83 QB member.
Speaking of Jacksonville.
Then exactly. What
his last game,
62-7 loss in Jacksonville.
Walloped.
That
was Dan Marino's last game.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the worst playoff loss since in terms of margin since 73-0, right?
I believe so.
For the Bears in Washington in 1940.
Yeah.
So literally the biggest playoff blowout in the last
for one of the greatest pure passers.
Last 82 years. And he went out that way. And John Elway got to go out saying this, saying he's graduating. He had the trophy. He had the MVP trophy. And then a few months later, he said he graduated. By the way, I wasn't in Denver. Then I was upset that ESPN broke into an arena football game to show that press conference. What little do I know?
I cried during that press conference because John was crying. He's like,
he's graduated. I'm graduated. It was an all-time moment.
How do you not get emotional now? Can I throw you a curveball before we're done, Mace?
Sure, you throw me a lot of curveballs today.
What if they beat Jacksonville? They go to Super Bowl 31, which was an awful Super Bowl, by the way.
31.
Speaking of Desmond Howard, right? They're at Super Bowl 31. They're facing the Green Bay Packers. There's Brett Favre. And John Elway loses another Super Bowl.
Oh,
is that another episode? Did I just give us another episode? It's kind of a what if on the what if, but like you beat Jacksonville and you make it to 31. And remember, this is the Eugene Robinson thing. It was like, this is Denver. Those guys suck. And Elway had the reputation. If Elway loses another Super Bowl, Louise.
What do you say we make that the next episode of this?
Let's do that. Orange and Blue today, presented by Shop Honda. May cease. Stay frosty.